Want to see a paradox? There's a question that haunted the greatest minds of the 20th century. A question so disturbing that Einstein himself refused to accept the answer. Here it is. Does reality exist when no one is looking? Not philosophically, not metaphorically, I mean physically. In 1927, physicists discovered something that should be impossible. They found that the act of observation, not thought, not consciousness, not intention, but the simple act of measuring something, changes what that thing fundamentally is. This phenomenon became known as the observer effect. And today, nearly 100 years later, we still don't fully understand what it means. But here's what we do know. It reveals that reality is not what you think it is. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this matters. Not just for physics, but for how you experience every single moment of your life. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover cannot be unseen. A disturbing possibility. The experiment that broke reality. Let me take you back to 1927. A scientist named Clinton Davison is conducting a routine experiment. He's firing electrons, tiny particles, through two narrow slits. He expects them to behave like bullets. Go through one slit or the other, hit the wall behind, done. But that's not what happens. Instead, he sees something impossible. The electrons create a pattern on the wall, an interference pattern, the kind you only see with waves. Like ripples in a pond when two stones are thrown at once. Particles behaving like waves. This alone would be strange enough. But then, someone asks the obvious question, what if we just watch which slit the electron goes through? So they add a detector, a simple measuring device, no human eyes, no consciousness, just a sensor. And the moment they do, the interference pattern vanishes. The electron stops behaving like a wave. It behaves like a particle again, as if it knew it was being watched. Now imagine being a physicist in 1927. Your entire career is built on the idea that reality is objective, that things exist independently of whether you measure them or not. And then this experiment tells you, no, measurement changes the outcome. Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, embraced this. He said, there is no quantum world. There is only an abstract quantum description. In other words, reality at the quantum level doesn't exist in a definite state until something interacts with it. And Einstein hated this. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove Bohr wrong. He famously said, God does not play dice with the universe. But experiment after experiment kept showing the same result. The act of measurement, the observer effect, is real. So here's the question that emerges. What does measurement actually mean? Does it require a conscious observer? Or is it something else entirely? This is where science and philosophy collide. Now, before we go deeper, I need to tell you something important. What I'm about to show you next will divide people. Some will say, this proves consciousness creates reality. Others will say, no, you're misunderstanding the physics. Both sides have compelling arguments. But here's the truth most people miss. The answer changes everything. Not just about quantum mechanics, but about your role in your own experience. So pay close attention to what comes next. Because the distinction I'm about to make is the difference between empowerment and delusion. It's the science versus mysticism, but what physics really says. Let's be precise. In quantum mechanics, before measurement, a system exists in what's called a superposition. That means all possible states exist simultaneously as probabilities. The electron is both wave and particle. The photon goes through both slits. Not because we don't know which one it is, but because it genuinely is both, until measurement. When you measure, this superposition collapses into one definite outcome. This is what physicists call wave function collapse. Now here's the key question. What counts as measurement? Does it require a human observer, a conscious mind, intention? Or is it simply any physical interaction that extracts information from the system? The scientific consensus is clear. It's the interaction, not the consciousness. A detector collapses the wave function. A photon hitting a screen collapses it. Even another particle interacting with it collapses it. No human mind required. Why does the confusion exist? So why do so many people believe consciousness creates reality? Because the language is misleading. The word observer in physics sounds like it means a conscious being. But in technical terms, an observer is just anything that interacts with a system in a way that records information. Even a rock can be an observer in this sense. Now, does this mean consciousness plays no role in reality? Not necessarily. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, suggest consciousness might be involved in collapse. But these are minority views, not mainstream science. Here's what we can say with confidence. The observer effect is real. Measurement changes quantum systems. This is not about belief or intention, it's physics. Human consciousness is not proven to create physical reality. So if you've ever heard quantum physics used to justify manifestation or law of attraction, that's not what the science shows. But here's where it gets interesting. Because even though consciousness doesn't collapse wave functions, it does something far more important in your daily life. And that's what we need to talk about next. Let's zoom out for a moment. We've been talking about electrons and detectors, but you're not an electron. You're a conscious being navigating a complex world. So what does any of this mean for you? Here's the connection most people miss. The observer effect teaches us that reality is relational. Things don't exist in isolation. They exist in interaction. And while your consciousness may not collapse quantum wave functions, it absolutely shapes the reality you experience. Not mystically, but mechanically. Let me show you how. See a radical application, an internal observation. Neuroscience shows us something remarkable. The act of observing your own mental states changes those states. This is not metaphor. When you become aware of an emotion, let's say anxiety, you activate different neural circuits than when you're simply in the anxiety. The moment you observe, I am feeling anxious, you've shifted from identification to awareness. And that shift is a physical change in your brain. The prefrontal cortex comes online. The amygdala's intensity decreases. You've changed the system by observing it. This is your version of the observer effect. Not quantum, but real. Think of a situation, an external observation. Now let's go deeper. The observer effect teaches us that measurement is never neutral. Every time you measure something, you interact with it. Every interaction changes the system. This applies to human behavior too. When you observe yourself with judgment, you create one outcome. When you observe yourself with curiosity, you create another. Same you, different observation mode. Different result. Think about relationships. When you observe someone through the lens of past hurt, you see evidence of betrayal. When you observe them through the lens of compassion, you see evidence of struggle. The objective reality of the person doesn't change, but your interactive reality, the one you actually experience, shifts completely based on the mode of observation. This is not creating reality with your mind. This is recognizing that you are always in interaction with reality. And the quality of that interaction determines the quality of your experience. So let's come back to the original question. Does reality exist when nitrogen monoxide 1 is looking? Quantum mechanics says, at the smallest scales, maybe not in the way we think. But here's what matters more. Does your reality exist when you're not paying attention? Because most people live on autopilot. They observe themselves through old patterns, through inherited beliefs, through unconscious reactions. And then they wonder why reality feels fixed. The observer effect doesn't give you magic powers, but it reveals something profound. You are not separate from reality. You are in constant interaction with it, and the mode of your observation, your awareness, your attention, your presence shapes the feedback loops of your life. Not because you collapse wave functions, but because you are part of the system you're observing. So here's my question for you. How are you observing your life right now? Through fear? Through curiosity? Because that observation is not neutral. It's changing the system. Right now, I am the quantum philosopher. And this is Quantum Genesis, where science meets the soul.